Hello, and welcome to another edition of Straight Talk with Don Chioffi. I am Don Chioffi, and this is election season, and it's probably should be to you one of the most important seasons of your life. The reason being, local elections are the closest elections to the people, and you should always take the opportunity to get that close to the people who are making all of the governmental decisions for you. So March 7th is town meeting day, Tuesday, and we have two candidates that are running for mayor of the city of Rutland, my hometown, not the town I'm living in now, but my hometown, my family's hometown for generations. I'm happy to welcome to Straight Talk Mike Doenges, candidate for mayor of the city of Rutland. We'll have a healthy discussion today, and hopefully you will get to know Mike a little better.
Great. Thanks for having me, Don.
That being said, Mike, I guess I'd give you the intro of who are you and why do you want to be mayor, and do a little introduction here.
Sure. So, like you said, it's Mike Doenges. We've joked about how the name's been mispronounced about 12 times over the past few months, but I've been dealing with that since grade school. I moved to Rutland in the late 80s with my family. We came up from Boston, and I've been here ever since, on and off. We went to Rutland High School, me and my siblings. I graduated in 1998. I'm the oldest of four. My parents still live up in Mendon, and I moved back to Rutland in 2016 after a back and forth stint with having to travel for work. So I'm glad to be back. We chose to move back to Rutland City and really wanted to, drive home with my family and the people I care about, that being in the city was a really important choice. We could have moved back to Mendon, we could have moved back to Chittenden, but we chose to be in Rutland City, your hometown, actually. So
You could have even chosen to move to Rutland Town.
Yeah,
we would have been glad to have you there.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I think Rutland's gotten a bad reputation myself. Quite frankly, it's a beautiful place to live. It certainly has its problems, a lot of which are not any of its choosing, but
Sure.
You have to deal with what you get dealt with for cards. And I guess to start off with, I'd ask you, what you perceive as a mayoral candidate who would be tackling these problems. What are the biggest problems that the city has to deal with in some kind of a priority order?
Sure. You actually asked me, why I wanted to run for mayor, and I look at Rutland's problems as much as we have problems. We also have challenges, and we have opportunities, like these different tiers. So I saw some real challenges when we moved back to the area, and over the past few years that we've been living in the city and participating, and I'm currently the board president on the Board of Aldermen for the city, dealing with some of those challenges and problems in the city. So one of the biggest ones, and the ones that's on everybody's mind right now, is our public safety concerns, right? The public safety concerns in Rutland are a big deal. Whether that's directly related to the opioid crisis and the problems that we're struggling with in our city because of, what we would consider substance abuse, which then leads into crime, and then also has connections directly to the homelessness situation, right? All of those things are major issues, but they are all interrelated. Some of the other things that Rutland struggles with is infrastructure. When you really think about that, our infrastructure needs a lot of work. That's something that we've struggled with for a long time. We've had plans in place to work on that. And then the bigger thing, and my big thing is those are tactical things that we can address now, but Rutland's been missing a significant plan and planning process for a long time. And I think the reason that we see those two issues that I just talked about, amongst some others, as big issues is because we don't have that bigger problem solved, which is the lack of population that we need to keep this and sustain the city the right way. And that population decline is very, very evident in the numbers. So.
Yeah, when we talked earlier about the chicken and the egg approach to the population problem, and I'm not responsible for having the answer, but you will be. How do you address this directly? I mean, what are the very specific things that you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got empty storefronts down there. They need to be filled. You need, if Rutland City is going to be a magnet, what is it that's going to attract those people that you're talking about?
So it truly is a chicken and the egg problem, right? It truly is a chicken and the egg problem where over time, even if you look at it now, we say, how can we have the need to increase our population when there's a lack of housing? Where are we going to put them, right? How can we have the need to increase our population when there's nothing to attract people here? But I look at it differently, and I do think that this is how we need to look at it. We have amazing natural assets that surround and exist in our city, right? And we need to leverage those. And the way we leverage those is by putting a master plan in place. So people are asking me, what's the action? Like, what do we actually have to do to make this happen, to make this work? If we put together a city master plan that's more than just the basic check marks, which is what our city master plan is right now, we're checking the box. But if we put together a city master plan with targeted population growth numbers, like numbers that are actually going to allow us to say, here's what we want our city to look like in 20 years. So let's use that as an example. So let's say in Rutland, in 2045, we want to have another, just keep it round. We have 15,000 people living in Rutland now. So let's say we wanted to add another, 14 to 15, right? Let's say we wanted to add another 10,000 people. That means over 20 years, we're going to add 10,000 people. That's 500 people a year if we hit that goal. That's not an insurmountable goal. But the thing is by creating that document and having this document that says this is what we want Rutland to look like, that targeted population growth is part of that document, it's part of the information that we're working on, that becomes a prospectus for the city. That becomes something that we can take to every developer that we want to bring here to build that housing. And that's something that we can take to an AMC or a Royal Cinemas and say, hey, do you want to come put your movie theater here now while it's less expensive to put it here? Because in 10 years, we're going to have another 5,000 people there. In 20 years, we're going to have another 10,000 people here. And that's a conservative number. Rutland City, over the last 40 years, has declined by 18% over 40 years. The state of Vermont has grown by 44% over that exact same time period.
Yes, and as you know, during that same time period where your population has declined, the property taxes have increased about 100%.
Absolutely. And the reason that that's happening, if you think about it, is we had this infrastructure that was sustained by almost 20,000 people in the early 80s, right? There were almost 20,000 people living in Rutland at that time. So that decline has not only, budgets increase, things get more expensive over 40 years. That just happens. But when there's less people to take on the burden of an infrastructure that was built for 30,000 people, and we only have half that many people living here, that's why people feel this burn so much, Don, is because we don't have the right amount of people here to carry that weight and to carry that load.
Well, it's a really, really fine line that you have to tread in order to, while you're doing this, because the city has never really wanted to assess how many people it takes to serve 18,000 as opposed to how many people does it really take to serve 14,000.
Right.
Or 13,000.
Right.
And those are tough decisions to make. Nobody's going to run on firing a whole mess of people, but by attrition, you've got to make some cost savings somewhere. What are the biggest costs that are driving taxes in the city right now?
So
in your opinion,
the biggest costs are the ones that we need the most. So they don't. So the things that we need the most are also some of the biggest charges. Police, fire, and public works, right? They really are. They're the most expensive pieces. The things that people see the most, like rec, they actually only take a small amount of the resources. So it's a juggling act. It's a real thing that you have to shuffle. Luckily, being on the board for several years, looking deeply into the budgets and spending time, there's some efficiencies that we can find in there. If we talk about how do we allocate resources, we have to find new resources to bring in without putting the weight of that new tax on the taxpayer. So leveraging federal grants a little bit more, right? Putting checking the boxes that we need to in the city, saying these are the things that we'll do so we can access more federal dollars. That's not hard to do. Those are really simple things we can do, and we can do that today.
So you don't have any problem getting on the telephone and calling up a Senator Welch, a newly minted Senator Welch, and saying, hey, Senator, we need some help here. Let's work together.
Absolutely, or Representative Ballant, right? So I've got good contact with Peter Welch. We've spoken several times just in the past few months, really leading up to his election, and then following up into this one. Becca as well, having that conversation, saying when the time comes, we need to start looking at those earmarks again, right? Things have changed for Vermont. We had the luxury of getting a lot more earmarks over the past few years, and we're going to have to start working on that again, in all honesty. But those conversations have already started between me and those two reps.
Well, as I look at this chicken and the egg problem, I guess I see it from an older person's perspective.
Sure.
And I know things have changed. I know, the sociographics and the demographics have changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
However, there still are some really good industrial opportunities that maybe the federal government and the state government can help us with in the region.
Yeah.
And I think, when I think for Rutland Town, for instance, of the region, of that particular aspect, I don't just think of Rutland Town because, we've got GE, and there's a whole mess of people that work at GE that aren't Rutland Town residents.
Sure.
So when we work to keep them here and to help them any way we can, we're helping the region out.
Absolutely.
And the same, I would imagine, is true of the city. But I don't see you guys targeting any of those major, because that's what drives the housing needs. Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, you got to have the houses for them when they come. But those are the kind of jobs that are going to produce taxes for the city,
especially for people that live here already, right? So being able to make sure we don't have all of our eggs in one basket is, to keep the chicken and the egg analogy, to make sure we don't have all of our eggs in one basket, we absolutely need to find skilled labor type jobs in industry to come to Rutland. And that is a big part of Rutland's history. That's kind of what we were built on. It's really important. The one thing that we can do beyond that, though, that I think is important, that will allow us to achieve the same goal, but maybe change how we do it a little bit, is look at what's happened with everything that we've dealt with COVID over the past few years. These companies all across the country, major Fortune 500 companies, have said to their employees, you can work from anywhere. Just as long as you do your job, you can work from anywhere. You can work remotely. That's new. I mean, big companies have done that before, but for small segments. But now marketing departments and accounting departments and all these different departments inside these businesses, you don't have to be located in a physical office anymore. You can work from home. So let's take that same scenario. Let's say GE has a new position for a new engineer on staff, and that engineer wants to move to Rutland. Their spouse or their partner, whoever that happens to be, that other person needs, historically, a geographically located job. They need to either be a nurse, or they need to go and work over here at Westminster, or they need to go work at another facility because they need that additional income, because cost of living is not cheap these days. Well, now with the hybrid work model, that engineer can move here as long as their spouse or partner doesn't have a geographically located position. So you don't have to have that two Rutland jobs. You can have one Rutland job and one job from somewhere else, and they both come here, and they're both spending their funds here, and they're both participating in our community. So it's a real opportunity that we can capture for the first time. We have this luxury that we have not had ever, to say, hey, come and live in an environment where you enjoy the things around you. You've got these lakes, right? Bombazine and Dunmore and St. Catherine. And then you've got these mountains like Killington and Pico and Okemo, all within 20, 25 minutes of Rutland. Rutland City is this epicenter, and Rutland Town. But Rutland City is this epicenter where people can come and live in an environment where they can enjoy that outdoor lifestyle. They can pick based on where they want to live now.
And yet, they may have a real sad lacking of hotel room space when they get here because of the other situation that we have here.
Yeah, it's a solid transition.
It's got to be solved. And I mean, and let's get back to that.
Yeah.
Rutland City has had a real serious problem of retention expansion in the available numbers and the needed numbers of police officers. And I understand that that's improving.
Yeah.
You would know that.
Yeah,
I
it is
assume
improving, and I'll talk about that.
It is improving, but what's the solution to that problem? Because those people are the most dedicated servants, public servants that I have ever met, and they are totally frustrated with the inability to do their jobs correctly. I mean,
I've had very similar conversations. So the frustration, since you brought it up, the frustration is the repeat offense people that are constantly offending. So what'll happen, for those who don't know, what'll happen is an officer will pick somebody up in the morning for shoplifting, perhaps. They'll have to take that person in, the person gets cited and released on their own recognizance, meaning they can go back out and they can go back out to live their life. Oh, in the process of living their life, 6 hours later, that same afternoon, they're picking that same person up for shoplifting again. And this is continuing to happen over and over. That's very frustrating. That's 50, according to the officers that I've talked to just in the past few weeks, just to get the current data, plus what we hear from our data specialist, Nathan, at the city, it's 50% of these calls are repeat, right? 50% of the capture, the cite and release are a repeat. So that has to be addressed, and I'll come to that. To go to the hotel piece, right? The lack of the rooms that we have there, that's affecting other things. That's affecting economic development, right? Because we have all these rooms available in Rutland, but they're not good quality rooms for good quality people. So why would a developer, even though we really all want that downtown boutique hotel, and that's something that would be great for our community, that's hard to bring because developers are going to look at that and say, well, you already have all these rooms in Rutland, but they're currently being occupied and they're not being used properly. So this public safety challenge that's kind of come about when we, just to wrap it all up in one term, the police department not being able to fill those 11 positions, like you were talking about, Don, that's been a real challenge. The state of Vermont requires that every police department has officers that go through the Vermont Police Training Academy, which is up here in Pittsburgh. So right now, there are 3 recruits going through that training academy to become Rutland City police officers, but that's a 6-month process. In the mayor's budget, we saw a reduction in police officers when we probably need them the most. And instead of reducing police officers, what we can do in the short term to solve that problem is to maybe shift some of those positions, be it long-term or short-term, to these community outreach staff members that work under Project Vision and under Commander Prouty. And what that does is that allows us to take non-sworn officers and put them out into the community, interacting with the people that need that interaction most, and support and take some of the load off of the officers in the city on a daily basis.
Well, the people, I don't think people really grasp just how traumatic it is for a police officer who puts his or her life on the line every single day. We know that the gun crimes have increased, especially with the drug problems. Most of these drug dealers have weapons, and when an officer goes out and makes an arrest for whatever, they're in jeopardy.
Yeah.
They're in jeopardy when they do it. And just to think that in 3 hours, the same person will be out there that they have to deal with again.
Yeah.
Maybe with a real burn on them because they've been arrested and interdicted by this particular police officer. I mean, it's bad enough to suffer that, to have to deal with that trauma as a police officer once.
Yeah.
But then again and again and again.
Yeah.
Our chief has told me he's had some down there in the southern sector that he's dealt with 3 times in one day.
Yeah.
You were talking about they're released on recognizance.
Yep.
This is 3 times
Yep.
in one day,
Yep.
one person.
So what I'll say for Rutland CDPD is that these guys know how to keep their cool. What I'll say for the Rutland City community is whenever someone gives our officers a hard time, there's 10 people jumping on that person saying, don't you dare. These guys are working their behinds off to get the job done. And they really are. They truly are working ridiculously hard. But those are called, so what we call those interactions are incidents, right? So these officers are dealing with multiple incidents a day, and typically you would never want to see that same officer dealing with the same person on a second or third incident, because it does have a natural ability to escalate. We've never had that problem. I don't want to say that that's a good reason to continue the way we are, because that could become a problem, even with the coolest headed officers, even with people who are, being somewhat respectful. It could escalate to a really bad situation. So luckily we haven't had that. But we do need to quickly get more officers to take the load off, but we also need to solve the problem of the release on your own recognizance. We have to approach the court system and say, hey, you have to get creative. We have to come up with a better solution. What is a program that these people can go through? I mean, we're not going to be able to, I can't just ask the legislature to, fix it. I have to say, as the mayor of Rutland City, this is what we're going to do in our space. And as long as we aren't breaking any rules or laws, this is how we're going to go about it. Part of that is having conversations with the judges and saying, hey, we know you can't change the way that bail is done. We know you can't increase your processing through your caseload, but can we rearrange your caseload? Because what happens is that person that's created and offended 24, 25 times now, they have 24 cases, and those are just cases stacked on cases stacked on cases that are out 3 years right now. The court system is backed up 3 years. That's one of the biggest problems that we don't talk about, is the load that's actually causing this, because even though they're released, they're supposed to go to court and face the charges for their alleged crimes. But they don't even have that opportunity because the caseload is so deep.
Well, we can boil that down to one basic problem, and it's the same problem in education as it is in any other field, and certainly in the community. It's a lack of discipline. If you don't have discipline and you don't have imminent discipline, then you've got escalation. It's got to be imminent, it's got to be quick, and it's got to be real. And it isn't.
Right.
There is no discipline. And so what that does is continues to encourage the bad behavior.
Right.
And I don't know what the answer to that is, Mike. I really don't. But these ne'er-do-wells they've got to be locked up. They've got to be taken out of the situation, and they've got to know that there's a consequence to their action. 3 years down the road, they're on recognizance, and they're not going to show up anyway. We used to put them in prison, and when we put them in prison, they had a time to sit there and think about their life, and maybe they'd have a chance to get some rehabilitation if they were under control in an institution, in a correction center.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to build any more correction centers, so it's just.
Well, and things certainly have changed, where the ability to use that as the tool in the toolbox isn't, one, it's not the only tool, which is good, and I'll talk about for a second what we can do in conjunction with, but two, that tool is less accessible, especially because of COVID, because they're not putting as many people in the same space. So two things that I think are key that I'm going to be working on when I get the job, right? The first one is having the conversations with the local judiciary, right, to say, can we flip that course load? Can we take the people that have the most amount of cases and prioritize them so they stop generating new cases, right? It's just a math problem. It's just if you have someone who's creating 10 cases a month and you take care of their 10 cases, then they can't create 10 more cases a month if they end up being properly, detained for the crimes that they've committed. And then the second piece of that is what is the actual problem? Right? Is the problem, are they stealing to feed a habit? Is the habit an addiction? And if that addiction is real, can we treat it? So there's a great program called Treatment Court. It's worked very well. And we need to look at that Treatment Court program and start utilizing it more in Rutland County. Right now, they have empty spaces available to work with people, but because of the order the cases are being taken and because of the way that people get into that system, it's not quite full yet. So we need to leverage those two things together. We need to say, can we flip that caseload, and can we work on this? And the answer may be no to one or the other, but we need to have the conversation.
Well, hey, listen, I'm the moderator here. I'm not here to suggest solutions to you, but we deal with we do the same thing in Rutland. We deal with the same problems you're dealing with. And from my perspective, the people that are the drug users, the users that may be stealing to feed their habit, they need somehow to have a timeout. And that's what's not happening right now, because we have this transient problem, and we have a state that does not want to evict them or will not let the owners of the facilities evict them based on drug usage, which means they're actually supporting a wet shelter as opposed to a dry shelter. Well, I don't find that totally wrong. I find it wrong in the context of, if you're going to do it that way, then at least you could make one of the consequences of drug use in that facility that you must get the help.
Yeah, I could see that and that's what changes, right? And so the difference between, a wet shelter and a dry shelter. Dry shelter is basically, there's rules to use the shelter that say you can't be using any substances, and there's other requirements. And wet says, come as you are, and regardless of your situation, we'll take you and we'll give you shelter. And so we have the ability, because we can define those lines, and I'm not an expert in this at all, by any stretch of the imagination.
Nor am I.
And there are plenty of people that are. So one of the great things that I do is I find the resources that have expertise, and I connect those resources together. That's part of just what I've done for the last 25 years of my career, is connect resources together. So what I think the answer, kind of down the path you're headed and down the same path that I'm headed, is to find those resources with those expertise, which do exist. There's a lot of them in the area, but they're working independently. We need to bring them together and in a really efficient way and say, okay, what are the skill sets that we can use here, and how can we set up a system that works? And then we can help people move through those pieces of the system appropriately, right? So some people might still need that wet shelter for a while, and some people might be able to move to that dry shelter. And that dry shelter, Don, that dry shelter may actually help them get to the next step and get out of the cycle that they're in.
Well, it's either got to be a dry shelter, or it's got to be some kind of a program that that allows them to dry out. I mean, basically that's it. They've got to have some kind of a timeout that gives them a chance to become drug-free for the amount of time that it takes to get their system off it.
Yeah.
What about the 1%? I haven't talked to you about the 1%.
1% option tax?
Yeah.
Okay, this thing is, you guys are already doing this in Rutland Town.
Oh, we love it.
And I know. And what's really nice is everybody, both on the Board of Aldermen, in the city, from the Treasurer's office, everybody's in support of it. Because at its absolute core, it takes a weight off the back of the property taxpayer. Right? At its core, what it does is says, for those shopping in Rutland City, when you're buying things that are taxed by the state at the normal state tax rate, there's an additional 1% that comes to the city of Rutland. So for that purpose, we're looking at, just running the numbers, $1.2+ million a year in additional tax revenue going to the city. That can go into capital improvement planning. So the next time we have to buy a police vehicle, or the next time we have to buy a fire truck, or quite frankly, we already have capital plans for those. But something like building repairs, or maybe we want to buy a piece of property so that we can sell it to a developer. Those types of things, planning for those capital projects. Remember, my big thing is planning. Planning for those capital projects tied directly to that 1% option tax, and that will really help the citizens of Rutland carry less of the burden on a day-to-day basis on their property taxes.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we've done. I mean, you have to look at your needs instead of your wants. You look at your absolute needs, your infrastructure needs, and if you target your 1% money to those needs, then obviously you're letting the general population pay for those, as opposed to just your property citizens. Taxpayers,
Exactly.
who are already pretty much burdened. I mean, they really are. Well, I told you half an hour would fly by. I'll give you the wrap up. It's your time.
Well, listen, this is really kind of an inflection point for Rutland City. That decline in population over those years, the past 2 or 3 years with COVID, all these things have led to this point where we can really capture a lot of great opportunities and move forward. We can address some real needs that we have in our city with public safety right now. We need to capture and do these things. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and make sure you go and vote on March 7th, town meeting day. Like Don said, it is the most important thing you can do to affect change locally.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's been a pleasure, and good luck on the 7th. May the best man win. I can say that because there's only 2 men running for the office.
Yes, you can.
Without being gender specific here. But anyways, it is very important. Exercise your democratic right. A whole mess of people fought very, very hard to give it to you. Don't waste it. Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks, Don.